Buseo, which means hello. And yes, that's the only word I know in Korean. Very welcome to the corporate venturing session at NextRise in Seoul, South Korea. Today we are going to discuss what were the lessons learned reaching the European Valley of Death, a study that was recently published with the European Commission, where we're going to see how governments can enhance this startup corporate collaboration to reduce that financial gap that many institutions are having when commercializing their discoveries to the market. And just for a second, what you are going to foresee in this session. And I want to share with you a few data. In Europe, there is quite a strong ecosystem. Around more than 20% that the European research institutions are in the top 100 worldwide in terms of research, so quite a strong ecosystem. On the other hand, there are around more than 3 million patents, according to the European Patent Office, and 95% of those are estimated inactive or dormant, under use, while the remaining 5% generates around 40% or impacts 40% of the GDP of Europe. Do you imagine for a second to activate an additional 5%? And this question is relevant, whether you are a government, a corporation, and a startup, which are some of the three main audiences today at NextRise 2020. If you're a government and maybe you are considering how to close this gap, this financial gap that many deep tech entrepreneurs coming from rich institutions face when they go to the market, or how to enhance that corporate startup collaboration that we are hearing more and more to enhance economic development. If you are a corporation, are there big opportunities there that you are missing, such as those, how to work with those deep tech entrepreneurs that sometimes we struggle to work with? How to spot opportunities before your competitors? And if you're a startup, that I think that is the main audience today, how to choose the right door to work with a corporate? Or if I have a private investor or a corporate investor, to who I am more attractive, or how can I craft a unique value proposition to both of them? So stay with me for the next 30 minutes, and I hope that I will answer, or I will try to shed light on some of those questions. For starting, I would like to share with you this case, the case of in this entrepreneur in North Carolina. So in this case, we have two parts, the corporation and the startup. The corporation, IESE, a few years ago had a challenge on how to tailor shoes for their clients, for their customers. So at the end, how can I tailor a shoe just for you? But they didn't have the internal resources to deploy it at the right speed or with the right knowledge. So they were scouting all around the world the best solutions, the best startups that they were able to leverage on. They found this entrepreneur in the States, co-founder of Carbon, a company that was doing 3D printing. After that, in this collaboration, they worked together to produce a new product that now is in the market called Futurecraft 4D, where they can tailor the back part of the shoe for each customer. And this is just one example of what we are going to discuss today. But what's the challenge? Normally, when we have a, let's say, common or frequent entrepreneur, that's, let's say, easy, keeping in mind that 7 out of 8 entrepreneurs disappear out after 3 to 5 years. They have an idea and they move it to the market. And they have all funds across all the growth stages, from family and friends, bootstrapping, and then business angels and venture capital. The challenge is when this entrepreneur is coming from a rich institution with some, let's say, back research behind, so a deep tech product of science supporting that startup, sometimes is they struggle because at the beginning they have those entrepreneurs research funds coming from research institutions and also maybe a public funding. Then at the end they have the others, business angels and venture capital. What happened in the middle? Nothing. What we call in Europe the European Valley of Death, a lack of financing for proof of concepts for that middle stage across both. And just let's figure out the why. Let's imagine that you are an investor and you have two entrepreneurs in your table where you are selecting which to invest. On the one hand, you have one entrepreneur that you clearly understand your business model, her product, and everything. She tells you that you're going to have a return on investment in around 7 years. So looks good. Then on the other hand, you have that other entrepreneur coming from a research institution, a PhD, that maybe you don't understand too much what she's talking about, something quite complex. Then she also tells you, rather than 7 years, I'm going to give you returns in 15 years. And, the risk is going to be quite higher. Which one do you prefer? So that's the challenge in this situation. And in the study that we did with the European Commission, we found kind of three main challenges or themes of challenges across that path. One is this limited guidance during the tech transfer process, or in research institutions, how they are trained or developed or even certificated to support those researchers to move to the market with ties to the industry, and maybe different levels of knowledge across institutions on how to do that process, also called technology transfer. Then in the next stage, this lack of financing, where there are a limited number of investors that are focused on that deep tech, sometimes high risk long-term, especially long-term investment strategy, where they are weakly connected, and there are sometimes not a lot of collaborations among them. Lastly, governments may sometimes or we don't tailor at the right way the public financial mechanisms to those type of entrepreneurs, which are quite unique. And that doesn't enhance the collaboration or involvement of the industry. If we see this with more data, we can see here, just to provide the example of Europe, an analysis that the European Investment Bank did a few years ago. Here you have in the x-axis, so the different growth stages of a company with the different, let's say, type of capitals that they will need. In the y-axis, you have the available capital or funding. And you can see in the red line where are the gaps. If we focus on this one, that is the main discussion of today, those funding for technology transfer is quite a challenge. The good news is that after, and also previously a bit months or weeks before publishing the study that we are discussing today, European Commission has started already to put in place a lot of mechanisms, really strong and good, well thought mechanisms to cover that gap, tailoring, as we will see later, some financial mechanisms and also releasing new ones. But where is the opportunity? And the opportunity comes when we discuss this case of Adidas and carbon, an example that also is happening in many other regions. And here you have other examples of companies that are following similar paths, such as Samsung, LG, or Hyundai. The phenomenon of corporate venturing, that, as we discussed in our recent study, at Harvard Business Review is the collaboration between established corporations and innovative startups to adapt to incorporate external ideas. And this is a phenomenon that is growing dramatically. If you compare, for instance, the number of companies that have adopted this practice since 2013 has increased quite a lot, quite heavily, as you can see on the right side with data from Global Corporate Venture Analytics. Then also, if you compare kind of one of the proxies, if you benchmark or you compare the 4,500 list of companies that were in 2000 compared to today, you will see that half of them has either disappeared or changed dramatically their business models. So this is happening, and this is happening with impact. And here we have a few examples. So from some companies that they have produced new product lines or revenue streams through challenge prices, from others that are quite heavily reducing their costs and improving their cost efficiencies through prototyping, proof of concepts, and also, for instance, here in the industry sector, speeding up the time span required to do a prototype or a proof of concept. And the reason why is that they are quite complementary. Now for a second, governments and corporations, look to the left side. Do you feel familiar with those? Do you feel yourself in that box? And governments, the corporations that you have in your region? So slow organizations, quite standardized, quite low pace, risk aversion. Then on the other side, governments checking your startups and entrepreneurs. Please also see yourself in the second box. Do you feel identified? Resources, access to markets, tight budget. However, the interesting part here is that the weaknesses of some are the strengths of the others, and this is one of the reasons of why this type of collaborations is growing quite dramatically. However, I also have bad news. Around 75% of these collaborations fail. But we have brought also good news. No, don't worry, governments, corporations, and startups. We have done for the past 5 years more than 500 interviews with chief innovation officers and similar roles all around the world to identify what were the difference among those that were succeeding and the others who not. And that is part of the research that we included in that study with the European Commission. I'm going to describe just a few of those. One is consider all your options. And what do I mean with this? Usually when we go around the world talking about corporate venturing, one of the misunderstandings or myths that we find is that people usually relate that with corporate venture capital. The good news is that although this mechanism is quite old, since 1918 more or less, or 14 more or less, the good part is that this has been sophisticated quite much, and the reality, as you can see in this slide, is much richer. Much better. So if you see here in the x-axis, you have the different maturity stages of an opportunity, from discovery to startup to scale up. In the y-axis, in this segmentation, you have the capital required to build that mechanism and also to grow an opportunity through the different stages. Finally, the time to results, from long term to medium term. Keep in mind, this there doesn't say short term. And there you have kind of the map, the classification of all the different options if you're a government and you want to enhance that ecosystem, if you're a corporation and you want to deploy your corporate venture strategy, or also startups. What is the right door to enter to a corporation? As you can see, there are many different ways. From scouting missions where you go to see what are the right startups, or a hackathon, challenge prize. They come on also incubators and accelerators that we have here a lot. Also venture builders, more recent venture client to be the first client of a startup, and then they come on corporate venture capital or startup acquisition. This here we don't include other type of acquisitions. And at the end of the day, another also to understand kind of in the framework, corporate venturing is understood within the framework of open innovation, which assumes that companies can and should incorporate ideas, external ideas from the external corporate structure. The second myth that we have found is that usually when we talk about corporate venturing, people usually understand this as, hey, this is only for big corporates. And always in the conferences, we see how someone raised the hand saying, hey, and what happened with the small and medium enterprises, where in some regions there are around 80 to 90% of the businesses in the region. So no problem, because this is also for SMEs. And we have seen many examples, not only in Europe, but all across the world, where there are SMEs already doing corporate venturing, so working with entrepreneurs. So that would be the first block of myths that we have found in our research. The second one, please use more data and less intuition. Since this phenomenon, especially some of those mechanisms, is more recent, in another study that we did, we asked to more than 200 chief innovation officers several questions, more than, let's say, 200. So we were quite tough on the interviews. And you know what was the most common, or what were the most common answers during the interview? One was, I don't have the answer. I am learning as a chief innovation officer. The second one was, I don't have data because this is so new, so I don't have historical data to benchmark. And third, I don't have also a benchmark to other companies because either they are in the same situation or they don't want to share. The good news is that in the past years, we have increased research focused on data-driven research to provide to chief innovation officers and similar roles data to take decisions. And I'm going to provide just one example. One of the data that we measured was this short-term, long-term strategy. Also, for a second, just to also, for a second, how many of you have been either today, NextRise 2020 in the conference, or in other conferences hearing this term? Yeah, let's go for short-term strategy, long-term strategy. But then what's short-term? What's long-term? Is it days, weeks, months, years? Is the same short-term in the pharmaceutical sector that in the high-tech or technology sector? For that, we try to put in place data to answer that question in this specific field of corporate venturing. For that, we split the collaboration between a corporation and a startup in 3 segments: identification of the opportunity, and here you have some examples, collaboration with the startup, and the integration of value in the company, in the established firm. And when we say value, we mean not only revenue, but also products, services, business models, mindset, processes, and knowledge. And these were the results on average. Although this is the mean, then we have also the, let's say, the deviation of those, but at least you have the mean. Here you have the segmentation of the 3 stages: identification, collaboration, integration, across all the different mechanisms. And for sure, we saw also that there are some deviations and some companies that are doing something different. And here we put some examples that is out of the scope of this of this session, but happy to discuss later or through questions, such as some companies that were using something we call the buffer unit or other mechanisms. Now it comes the interesting data. I know that it's going to be a bit complex, the following slide, but please keep with me because I ensure that the insight behind is going to be interesting. First, let's focus on these two axes. Axis X, total months required per opportunity, which means how many months do you need per mechanism, corporate venture mechanisms, since the identification until the integration of value. That was our first measure. The second one, the y-axis. What's the ongoing cost per opportunity per year of one opportunity in one of those mechanisms, which includes not only the building of the mechanism, but also the opportunity flow from all those stages. Important, it excludes investment cost. I repeat, it excludes investment cost. Those were the results. And there you have all the mechanisms placed on those two axes, plus a third axis, which is the size, the diameter of the bubble, whether it's in different maturity stages, as if you remember in a previous slide we have seen, from a discovery and a startup or a scale-up. Now the insight. Please focus on those two bubbles, corporate incubator in the right side and venture client in the left side. Do you see something interesting there? Do you see that you can achieve in some, depending on your corporate venture strategy of mechanisms, how do you architect, how do you select those mechanisms, you can be 3 times faster or 5 times more cost effective? This doesn't mean that you don't have corporate incubators, but if you use it, think twice why you are doing it, have a strong reason to do it. So if you're a government, putting in place data to support your decisions on corporate venturing is going to enhance your impact in the ecosystem. If you are a corporation, you can have dramatic increases on the speed and reduction of cost if you design a tailored, well-structured, well-thought, data-driven strategy on corporate venturing, the selection of the mechanisms. And if you are in a startup, keep in mind what's the right door to enter to a corporation, because it's going to have consequences. Now let's connect the dots with the problems that we have discussed at the beginning and possible solutions that we have discussed today. So on the one hand, we have this strong research mechanism, ecosystem, that we are having this example of Europe, but this is also happening in other regions around the world, and a strong research ecosystem. Then this valley of death, this lack of commercializing of discoveries from one place to another, where we see that there is a lot of hiding potential in that. And then we see this trend of corporate venturing, of corporates investing, collaborating, working with startups that is growing dramatically, and they put in place resources. Do you mind for a second connect the need with the over-resource something together? And that's why, or what we try to do in this study and some of the solutions we found around that. But how, if you are a government, a corporation, a startup, how can you implement that? How can you enhance that? So we saw kind of 3 themes of solutions. It's not easy, but kind of some thematic themes of solutions that may shed some light on that theme. One is to promote more investment mechanisms, financial mechanisms for proof of concept. So at the end, if you remember the slide before, that gap, we call it the European Valley of Death at the beginning, more financial mechanisms to cover that gap in the middle, either through investment funds or replicating what the Josemaria program does in Israel or in other places, where when a private investor or a corporation puts $1 million, the government puts another $1 million, just an example. Or more enhancing that more corporations co-invest in those deep tech entrepreneurs, more specialized investors, enhancing philanthropic funds. The second one was tailoring. If you remember, when we spot the challenges, one was the lack of tailoring of financial mechanisms for proof of concepts for those deep tech entrepreneurs, so entrepreneurs coming from recent institutions. So tailoring those. In the case of Europe, we recommended to tailor one mechanism, which is the SME, Small and Medium Enterprise Instrument, which focus on early stage startups. So we suggested to tailor that to those deep tech entrepreneurs. Also enhancing, but also monitoring what corporates are starting to do, those private equity investments. So for instance, there is one energy company, I know that their managing director of the corporate venture capital, what they are doing is they are investing between $50,000 and $150,000 in proof of concepts on those deep tech entrepreneurs coming from these institutions, where what they do is they invest that, they give around 12 months to those entrepreneurs to try to do a proof of concept, and they support it with other resources. And then after 12 months, they ask for a discount in that investment in the next round. This is just one example. I'm not saying that that's the right strategy, but at least monitoring what's happening across corporates in this field to learn and share practices. And then support further this technology transfer process, not only in Europe, but in other regions, sharing more success stories, and we have seen a few today. Also unifying regulation in the case of Europe is quite fragmented in terms of different laws per country, and enhancing more the training, the knowledge, the research on this industry engagement, university institutions engagement with the industry. We are not going to enter in detail in this table, just to so you have it, but here we enter into the next level of implementation, and here we provide more examples, more how to deploy those more, let's say, generic recommendations that we have suggested. So finishing, because I remember that you want to finish in around 30 minutes, what are the conclusions of today? And we're going to try to translate the conclusions for the three main audiences of governments, corporations, and startups. So if you're a government, one would be think on tailoring, well, let's start from the beginning. Understanding the characteristics, unique characteristics that a deep tech entrepreneur, deep science entrepreneur has, and then try to tailor those to your public financial mechanisms that you are providing. It is not another small and medium enterprises. The characteristics in terms of short-term, long-term, so time horizons, the risk, the cost, the attractiveness from the private and corporate investors is different. So try to understand that persona and try to tailor to them. The second one is, if you don't have yet those co-financial mechanisms for those proof of concepts, try to develop those focusing on more strategic KPIs, key performance indicators that can enhance, develop, increase your economic development. And also try to support more studies, more research, and more training, connecting this, what we have discussed before, corporate deep tech, no? So all the corporations with the universities and research centers. Next, corporations. If you're a corporation, these type of entrepreneurs are quite different. So try to develop a team that has the capability to work with those type of entrepreneurs, with those research institutions, with those type of entrepreneurs that are long-term, maybe they don't have a business knowledge, but are really good on their products, on the research, on their discoveries, on their technologies. And also, another thing to keep in mind is, if you have seen in the trend, since there are more and more companies doing corporate venturing, what happened before, you were able to choose among different startups, and they were all happy to work with you as a corporation. However, since now you have, let's say, more competitors, more corporations doing corporate venturing, offering similar benefits, try to craft your unique value proposition. So keep in mind, what makes you unique? in your value proposition when you approach a startup. And please forget all the common, let's say, answers that corporations say. And I can read your mind: financial resources, technical expertise, distribution channel. Thinking your competitor is going to answer the same. The question again is, what makes you unique? And for instance, I give you two examples to do that. One can be agility. Can you be the fastest corporation working with a startup? Rather than taking a year or a month or a week, can you take days? Because that is something that is very relevant to a startup. And a startup today maybe is not a startup in 30 days. And the second one, try also to team up with other corporations. Why? Because imagine that you are 5 different companies in 5 different sectors approaching one entrepreneur. Before, you were only one technical expertise in one industry. Now you have 5. Before, maybe you were 100,000 employees. Now you have 500,000. Before, maybe you were in 30 countries. Now maybe you are in 100 countries. So teaming up with other corporations is going to maybe increase your value proposition to the startup, reduce your innovation cost because you're going to share that cost of maybe proof of concept with other corporations, and also is going to enhance your sensing capability to identify deal flow, to identify opportunities. Lastly, if you are a startup, now you are more interested than before because of what we have discussed before. So now it's the right moment to approach corporations. But also keep in mind, there are many doors. You not only have the corporate investor, corporate venture capital arm of a company, you have many other ways: hackathons, venture clients, corporate accelerators, incubators. So choosing the right door, the right strategy may enhance your chances to enter to work into that with that corporation. Lastly, if you have liked this session, we have in the next slide providing you can download right here, right now, and you're going to have access to the latest report that we have published with the European Commission, where here you have the QR code you can get with your phone, mobile phone. Do a picture, and with here you will have access to the PDF that we are describing here. Here I have to also include and provide thanks to all the team of the European Commission that have really supported us with this, with Matthias and many others, and also my co-authors and collaborators, so Andrea, Mark, Paola, Julia, and many others. Lastly, if you want to see more and read more about other studies that we are doing on this theme of innovation, corporate venturing, here you have others where you have the related QR code. One was on how to increase speed and reduce costs on these corporate venturing collaborations, and the other one is what are the hottest opportunities and ways to collaborate on this corporate startup engagement that is happening in Latin America. With this, we conclude this session at NextRise in Seoul, South Korea. I hope that we all leaders in governments, corporations, and startups are going to continue moving this action, this movement towards collaboration between corporations and startups. The wall is for you. Thank you very much, and keep in touch.